And yet he does. And as we discussed over the weekend, how on earth could he love Saul of Tarsus after what Saul of Tarsus had done? You know, but, you know, we should be in awe of our God. And this fear and trembling is really an expression which we could translate, work out your salvation with awe and respect. You know, we have to be in awe of God and we have to respect his wishes. That's what we need to do. And that's how we work our salvation out. We work it out and do everything without complaining and arguing. Without complaining and arguing. Well, I don't know what the Americans are like. I have no idea really what the Americans are like. But any of you ever been to Australia? Do you know what the Australians call the British? They call them whinging poms because they're always complaining. The British are always moaning. The British are a nation of malcontents. We're always complaining and moaning about this, about that, about the other. And it's very easy in England to start that attitude. You know, people are always complaining about their salary. They're moaning about their boss. They're grumbling about the job they have to do. It just goes on and on and on. And if you don't watch it, you can end up being like that as a Christian. You know? I mean, I don't like being around people who use bad language. If I'm around people who use bad language, I know what's going to happen, and you probably can guess what'll happen. One will slip out, you know. And I don't like being around people who are moaning and complaining all the time because I know what's going to happen. I'll start moaning and complaining, right? But it's a tremendous witness if you don't complain and argue. Notice where it says here, do everything without complaining and arguing so that you may become blameless and pure children of God without fault in a crooked and depraved generation. Just think of the power of that. I mean, we live in a crooked and depraved generation, don't we? Mm-hmm. I mean, if you think about the society that Paul moved in, if you think about particularly the eastern half of the Roman Empire, where he was born up and bred and where he did most of his work, there's quite a number of similarities between them and us. I mean, they were very philosophical. Being, you know, following the trade of the Greek philosophers. They're very highly educated, prized education. They were very much into sport and athletics. You know, they were very much into sex. They were very much into binge drinking. The parallels are absolutely enormous. You know, I mean, a very immoral society. You know, I mean, I think they said about Roman women changed their husbands every time they changed their fashion, I think it was. Something like that. Once a year, was it? They tended, you know, I mean, they were terrible. Marriages, you know, marriage meant nothing. Absolutely not at all. Paul, these Philippians lived in a crooked and depraved society. So do we. And if we want to shine like stars, that's what he says here, in which you shine like stars. If you want to shine like stars in such a society, then two of the things you must not do is you must not complain and you must not argue. You must not complain and you must not argue. Don't complain, don't argue. And you'll shine like stars. You shine like stars in the universe as you hold out the word of life. And that's our main duty to the world in which we live. Our main duty to this crooked and depraved generation in which we live is to hold out the words of life. Hold out the Lord Jesus Christ to these people. And these people are much more likely to listen to us if we're not one of these whinging poms, if we're not a moaner and a groaner, if we're not a complainer and an arguer, if we show them that we are content with our lot, you know, then they're much more likely to listen to us. Now in verse 17 he goes on to say, but even if I am being poured out like a drink offering on the sacrifice and service coming from your faith, I am glad and rejoice with all of you. Now remember, Paul is in prison here now in Philippi, and he's been in prison for about 5 years. A couple of years in Caesarea Philippi, Then he appealed to Caesar's court, and he was chained to a soldier and sent off to Rome, and the ship got shipwrecked on Malta, and he was there 3 months, and eventually he gets to Rome, and he's under house arrest in Rome for 2 years, and this was written towards the end of the 2-year period, and it looks like he knows now that his case is coming up before Caesar's court. He may even have a date for it. We don't know. And he was pretty hopeful, if you read other parts of the letter, that in fact he would be freed, that the Caesar's court would decide there's no case, let him go. But there's always this hint that he wasn't quite certain, because you can never be quite sure. Because the Caesar quite often didn't sit in on those cases. He just left it to the Senate. They just dealt with it. Some of the Caesars, more than others, got involved. You know, Claudius often liked to sit in on interesting cases. He always wanted to know what was coming up, and he would sit in on certain of them. You had others, like the Caesar who was around at this time, like Caesar Nero, who would just, well, if he had nothing else to do, would breeze in and just would say, well, cut his head off. And that would be it, and walk out. Wouldn't even bother to listen to the case, you know. And so Paul was pretty certain, you know, that he was going to be freed, but there was always this hint, you know, even if I am being poured out like a drink offering on the sacrifice and service coming from your faith, I am glad and rejoice with all of you. And earlier in the letter he hints at that too, and he says, you know, even, he's implying even if the case goes against me, you know, I don't want to let down the name of Christ. You know, I want, if I am to be put to death, then I want to do it in a way which will bring honor to Christ. And I should think when Paul was writing those words, he was thinking of the stoning of Stephen. You know, he stood there and he gave the command to stone Stephen to death, and he saw the way Stephen died, and Stephen looked up to heaven and said, you know, don't lay this at their charge. You know, in other words, Stephen was forgiving the people who stoned him to death, and that must have had a big impact upon Paul. So he says, you too should be glad and rejoice with me. You too should be glad and rejoice with me. And elsewhere in the letter he says, look, no matter which way it goes, you must stand firm in your faith. Whether I'm set free or whether I'm put to death, you have to stand firm in your faith. Now, we come on to Timothy here now. He's going to talk about a couple of people, Timothy and Epaphroditus. Now, let's have a look what he says in verse 19 here about Timothy. I hope in the Lord to send Timothy to you soon, that I also may be cheered when I receive news about you. So basically, Paul wanted up-to-date news on these people at Philippi. His plan was to send Timothy to them, and Timothy would find out how they were, and Timothy would bring the news back. I want to send Timothy to you. And then we have this incredible statement, I have no one else like him. I have no one else like Timothy who takes a genuine interest in your welfare. Now, I don't know if you're like me, and I have to admit this, there are a number of people who I have a genuine interest in. Sometimes with some people, I ask how they are, I ask how their family is doing, I ask how their job is going, because that's the polite thing to do. It's not a genuine interest, actually. It isn't a genuine interest. It's the polite thing that you do in conversation. You know, and there's nothing wrong with it. You know, as a limited human being, and I have to recognize all of us are limited human beings, it's very difficult for us to take a genuine interest in a wide range of people. We can't. We can't. That's not possible for us. You know, there are a number of people who are close to us, a number of people we have regular contact with, you know, maybe our next door neighbors, maybe the people we work with, you know, some of the people in our church. We have a genuine interest in those, right? And sometimes in the past I felt very guilty about not having a genuine interest about lots of other people. But, you know, I can't do it. I really can't do it. I can't take a genuine interest in 3,000 people. It's totally impossible for us. You know, now here Timothy had a genuine interest in the Philippians. He really did. Now, fair enough. What happened, if you remember, I think on Paul's second missionary journey, he circumcised Timothy so he could take him with him. And he did actually, on that second missionary journey, take Timothy up to Philippi. And Timothy was there when Paul first preached the gospel in Europe and saw those initial converts at Philippi, and maybe they just hit it off together. You know, they hit it off together. You do that with some people, don't you? You meet some people and you get on with them absolutely great. Right from the word go, and you become friends and you care about each other for the rest of your life. But here I have no one else like Timothy who takes a genuine interest in your welfare. Remember what he said in chapter 2 verse 4? Each of you should look not only to your own interests, but also to the interests of others. Timothy looked to the interests of the Philippians. Somehow or other, these groups had bonded together. And now goes on to say in verse 21, for everyone looks out for his own interests. Well, that's true. Everyone looks out for his own interests. Yes, you all do. I do. Look out for our own interests. And as I pointed out earlier, in verse 2, each of you should look not only to your own interests, because you are going to do that, but also to the interests of others. Right? So, you know, we mustn't deny, you know, there's nothing wrong with looking out after your own interests. That's right, but it shouldn't stop there. For everyone looks out for his own interests, not those of Jesus Christ. Jesus Christ's interests are much broader, much bigger than our interests, and we have a small part to play in that. But you know that Timothy has proved himself because as a son with his father, he has served with me in the work of the gospel. They knew that because Paul was there or with Timothy the first time that he visited Philippi. They knew Timothy, and they obviously loved him and respected him. I hope therefore to send him as soon as I see how things go with me. So as soon as I get the decision, you know, as soon as I've appeared before the Senate, as soon as I've appeared before Caesar's court and I've got the decision, I'll send Timothy straight away. So you will know the decision absolutely straight away. And I am confident in the Lord that I myself will come soon. Paul was confident that he would be released. Okay, he's very confident that he will be released. Although in verse 17, but even if I am poured out like a drink offering, and you get this in this letter, parts of this letter is saying things like, oh, I'm going to come soon, but then parts of the letter saying, well, you know, even if I'm not released, even if I'm put to death, even if I am poured out. And so it's a very, very human letter. It's a human letter in which one point he's saying that he's confident he's going to be found not guilty, and then at the back of his mind is always the chance that I am going to be found guilty, you know, and you get this feeling which shows it's very, very human man. But if you think about Timothy, I did actually write a booklet called Timothy the Man. And if you follow the life of Timothy, it's very interesting how he starts off. Obviously, he was probably possibly saved at Paul's first missionary journey. He's not mentioned. And then when he comes back on Paul's secondary missionary journey, he's obviously got very high status in his local church. Paul circumcises and takes him with him. And he's there throughout most of Paul's second missionary journey, and he's there on a third missionary journey. And here now Paul is in prison and Timothy is with him. And this is very, very high praise of Timothy. You see, and then you read 1 Timothy and 2 Timothy. And you think, what's gone wrong? What's gone wrong? Timothy's gone off the boil. When you read 1 Timothy and 2 Timothy, you see Paul pleading with Timothy. Come on, stir up that gift within inside you. Come on, get back to teaching. Come on, do the work of an evangelist. Come on. And something's gone wrong with Timothy. We might touch on that a bit later. But there's a lesson for us in that, you know. When I was a younger Christian, I used to look around at some of those old people in church that used to sit there and do practically nothing. And I used to look at them and think, God, look at them. Blah, 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 blah. Now I'm getting to that stage myself. And you're thinking, yeah. But the fact is, I've also gone through life, and I have gone through, and unfortunately, I have seen Christians who have been keener, more energetic, and better Christians than I am fall away. You know, fall away. And I have great respect for those older people who are still worshipping the Lord. Absolutely. They may not be doing much, but they have run their race. They've stayed the course. They're still there. They're absolutely still there. Timothy is a lesson to us all. Be very careful. You don't go off the boil. We'll come back to him in a moment. Then he comes on to Epaphroditus, verse 25. But I think it necessary to send back to you Epaphroditus. Epaphroditus was obviously seemingly from Philippi. My brother, my fellow worker, and my fellow soldier, who is also your messenger, whom you sent to take care of my needs. Now what had happened is the Philippians were actually an excellent group of people who supported Paul throughout his ministry. And he says elsewhere, nobody supported me. Nobody sent gifts like you. And he says about them that, you know, they often looked out to find out where Paul was so they could send him money so he could spend his time preaching and teaching. Not only in the synagogues on the Sabbath day, but also in the marketplaces and the speakers' corners and things like this during the course of the week. Of course, if Paul didn't have any money, then he would actually resort to tent making or tent mending so that he could, you know, earn enough money to pay his rent and buy his food and things like this. But of course, if he was doing his tent work, then he couldn't be out there preaching and teaching. So the Philippians in many ways kept him going and kept him going. And you say, you know, you share in the gospel. You share in the work of evangelism, he says, because you're doing this. However, because of this long period of time, the Philippians had lost where Paul was. Because, as I said, he'd been 2 years in prison in Caesarea. Then he had gone on this ship, and the ship had been shipwrecked, and he got stuck on Malta for 3 months, and then they eventually got to Rome, and the Philippians didn't really know where he was. And then they found out that he was in Rome, and then they send this gift with Epaphroditus. So he says, you know, you sent him to take care of my needs. They had sent another gift to Paul. For he longs for all of you, and he is distressed. Epaphroditus is distressed because you heard he was ill. Yes, he was ill. Indeed, in verse 27, he was ill and almost died. Epaphroditus was ill, so ill that he almost died. God had mercy on him, and not on him only, but also on me, to spare me sorrow upon sorrow. Now, why did Paul have sorrow upon sorrow for Epaphroditus? Well, because he was ill. Well, why didn't Paul just lay his hands on him and heal him? You see, something has changed. If you read through the book of Acts, you'll see Paul healing people. You know, you will see Peter healing people. You don't see them getting terribly upset about people being ill. They just go and heal them. Here, Paul now is distressed. The Philippians are distressed because this guy is ill. Paul had sorrow upon sorrow. Now, but God had mercy on him. God had mercy on him. Therefore, I am all the more eager to send him, so that when you see him again, you will be glad, and I may have less anxiety. So obviously the guy recovered. The guy recovered, he got better. Notice I don't use the word he was healed. I don't use the word he was healed. He recovered, he got better. I don't think I can use the word healed, because as soon as I say the word healed, that puts us back into the dispensation of Acts or the dispensation of the Gospels, where healing took place. Here, he got better. Now, Paul probably prayed for him. Not probably, I'm pretty certain he prayed for him. I really do not know what illness this man had. But look what he goes on to say, verse 29, welcome him in the Lord with great joy, and honor men like him, because he almost died for the work of Christ, risking his life to make up for the help you could not give me. This illness was so severe, this man almost died from it. So it was a very, very severe illness. Severe illness. Now, One of the things we need to note, if you look at that chart about healing in the New Testament there, we know if we look at the Gospels, Matthew, Mark, Luke and John, if you look at them, they're almost exclusively Jewish. There's little bits and pieces to do with the Gentiles. One or two Gentiles come onto the scene, one or two prophecies quoted from the Old Testament to relating to Gentiles, but basically the Jews dominate. And you will see, when you read through Matthew, Mark, Luke and John, is miracles, miracles everywhere. You know, and particularly healing miracles. Lots of them there. Lots of healing miracles in the Gospels. When you move into the dispensation of the Acts period, you will find it's a period of time which is again dominated by the Jew, but not as exclusively as the Gospels. The Jew is first, but there's also the Gentile. Now there are certain letters which are exclusively to the Jews, to Jewish Christians: Hebrews, James, 1 and 2 Peter, 1, 2 and 3 John, Jude and Revelation, all addressed to groups of Jews. You'll find letters of Paul, and these are addressed to churches which are made up of Jewish Christians and Gentile Christians: Galatians, 1 and 2 Thessalonians, 1 and 2 Corinthians and Romans. Now if you read through those Jewish letters, some of them are quite hard to understand actually. Some of them are quite hard to understand. And unfortunately, because, well, what can I call it? Harmonizing theology is the dominant theology in England. Basically, all the New Testament is one. And what they try and do is harmonize everything so it all agrees with everything else. And this causes huge problems in their theology. It means basically they can't understand the New Testament. And as I go around different churches, they'll often tell me, you know, I ask how your Bible study's going like this, and quite often they